We continue now at the top of Daf Pedalet Amid Beis Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 84b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought the Mishnah in Bikurim, which says Bikurim are brought from the 7 species. These are the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael. And it says you cannot bring them mitmarim shebaharim. You can't bring them from the date palms that are in the mountains. V'lo mipero sheba'amakim, and not from the grain crops that are in the valleys. And the Gemara continues and elaborates. Amar Ula says, Im Hevi, if one brought any of the disqualified produce as Bikurim, so then lo kidesh, so then he did not sanctify them at all. And Rashi explains, mitmarim shebaharim, one cannot bring them from the date palms in the mountains, afal pi shehem mishiva minim. Now, even though that is included in the 7 species, the dvash, because when it says in the pasuk dvash, which is one of the 7, hainu dvash tamarim, that actually refers to the honey of the dates, and so therefore, really technically, it is part of the shivas aminim. But still, hani shebaharim v'sheba'amakim, but those in the mountains and in the valleys, einon min hamuvchor lefi shein kechushin, those are considered inferior, and therefore they're not min hamuvchor, they are not supposed to be brought. And the Gemara continues, Yosef Rabba v'ka'amar lo l'hashmait. The Rabba was sitting and he said over this teaching. And the Gemara continues, Esvei Rabbi Acha bar Abba l'Rabba. Rabbi Acha bar Abba asked Rabba a question from the following brisa. The pasuk says, Karban Reishis. It says that it's a first fruit offering. Shetehei Reishis l'chol hamenachas. And it means that it has to be the first of all menachas that are from the new crop. V'chein hu omer, and likewise it says, Ba'akrivchem mincha chadasha l'Hashem. When you bring the mincha chadasha, the new mincha, b'shavuosei. And so, Ein li'ela chadasha shel chitim, I only know that we're talking about the new one of wheat. But chadasha shel sa'orim minayin, from where do we know the new one of barley? Talmud lomar chadasha, it says chadasha, emeino inyan lechadasha shel chitin, if we can't apply it to the new one of wheat, so teneyu inyan lechadasha shel sa'orim, so then we should apply it to the new of barley. And Rashi Ksaviyat explains, Karban Reishis, I only know the new grain of wheat. Shtei halechem, meaning this is a reference to the Shtei halechem. Kodem l'chol hamenachos. The Shtei halechem is the first of all carbon minchas which are going to be brought from wheat. But what about chadashim shel sa'orim, the new one of barley? Kagon minchas kenos, for example, the mincha of the sota, which is barley. Shelo yavi kodem Shtei halechem. One explanation over here is that the idea is that should not be brought before the Shtei halechem. Kach shamati, Rashi Ksaviyat says that's what I heard is the explanation of this line, but v'lo nira beinai, that doesn't seem to be correct. Sharei ha'omer kodem lozeh misa'orim, because the omer already comes first from this in terms of barley, and so therefore lishna achrin, another explanation, ein li ela shel chitin minchas shtei halechem, I only know of wheat, meaning again the mincha of the shtei halechem, haba min hachitin, which comes from wheat, shetehei kodemes l'chol hamenachos habos min hachitim, that should be the first of all minchas that come from wheat. Chadashim, that come from all of the wheat from the new grain. Chadasha shel sa'orim minayin. Now, how do I know the new of barley? Meaning, mincha sa'omer haba sa'orim, the mincha sa'omer which comes from barley, minayin shetei kodemes l'sa'orim. How do we know that should be the first of barley? Shelo tehei mincha misa'orim kodem lo, that no mincha of barley should come before that. And so chadasha, it says chadasha, meaning shtei pa'amim. It says that 2 times. It says v'hikravtem mincha chadasha be'emor el hakohanim. It says mincha chadasha over there in emor. B'hakrivchem mincha chadasha, and then it also says b'akrivchem mincha chadasha b'pinchas. It says that in Parshas Pinchas. And the Brisa continues discussing the issue of precedence. Uminayin shetei kodemes lebikurim. How do we know that the shtei halechem should precede bikurim? Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says v'chag shavuos ta'asa lecha bikurei katzir chitim. We'll see Rashi in a moment, but from that pasuk we learn again that the shtei halechem precedes bikurim. However, ve'ein li'ela bikurei katzir chitim, I only know that it precedes the bikurim of wheat, that first wheat that is brought as bikurim. But katzir sa'o, and how do we know it also precedes the first harvest of the barley? Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says v'chag hakotzer bikurei ma'asecha asher tizra basada, and from that pasuk we learn that which is planted in the field, that includes barley as well. V'ein li'ela shetizra, now I only know if the person planted it, but olu me'alein minayin, how do we know if it grew on its own, that it applies to that as well? Talmud Lomer basada, it says in the field, that even means it grew on its own. V'ein li'ela basada, I only know in the field. Minayin l'ravos shebegag v'shebechurva v'shebeotzitz v'shebesfina, how do I know also to include if it grew on a roof or in a rune or in a pot or in a ship? Talmud Lomer bikure kol asher bi'artzam, it says anything in your land. And so at this point we know wheat and barley. Minayin shetei kodemes l'nisachim, how do we know that the shtei halechem should precede any wine libations from the new wine? Upeiros ha'ilon, or let's say the bikurim that's brought from the first fruit, from the fruit of the trees. Nemar kan, it says over here, bikure ma'asecha, it says the phrase bikure ma'asecha, which we just quoted above, v'chag ha'kotzer bikure ma'asecha. V'nemar lahalon bi'ospecha es ma'asecha min hasad, it also says bi'ospecha es ma'asecha min hasad, it uses the word ma'asecha over there, that's talking about the gathering time at Sukkot time. Ma'alahalon, now just like over there, it refers to everything that's being gathered. Nisachim, upeiros ilan, the libations, and the fruits from the trees. Afkan, so too over here, nisachim upeiros ilan, it refers to the libations and the fruits from the tree. And in any case, the question here is, katani mihon, nevertheless, what is mentioned in this brisa? It says, shebegag, shebechurva, shebeotzitz, v'shebesvina. It says on the roof, in the rune, that which is in the pot, or that which is from the ship. And so therefore it sounds like the bikurim are coming from these areas where it is inferior, where it's not the choicest. We said above that it can't come from the mountains, it can't come from the valleys, it can't come from areas where it is not where it is not the best quality. And so that's the question from the brisa. And the Gemara continues and says, no, seifa asan lemenachos, that end part of the brisa where it mentions gag and churba and otzitz and svina, that's not talking about bikurim anymore, that's just talking about menachos in general. And Rashi explains, Minayin shetei shtei halechem kodem lebikurim. How do we know that the shtei halechem should precede bikurim? Shelo yavi bikurim kodem l'shtei halechem. One shouldn't bring the bikurim before the shtei halechem. Talmud lomar bikurei ketzir chitim. It says in the pasuk bikurei ketzir chitim. Kolomar, what that means to say is shtei halechem yei kodem l'chol ketzir chitim afilu bikurim. It means the shtei halechem should precede all ketzir chitim, all harvest of wheat. Meaning to say it should even precede the bikurim. In Yenacher, Rashi says another explanation. Chag Shavuos Bikurei Ketzir Chitim. We'll take a look at the Mesoras Hashas. Means as follows: Masha Atom Mevi Bechag HaShavuos, referring to what is brought on Shavuos. Again, Shu Shtei Halechem Yehei. Again, that refers to the Shtei Halechem, which again should precede the Bikurim. And Rashi continues, Talmud Lomer Chag HaKotzer Bikurei Masecha. It says Chag HaKotzer Bikurei Masecha means to say Chag Shatom Mevi Bikurim Shtei Halechem, the holiday in which you bring the Shtei Halechem Yehei Kodem L'chol Asher Tizra Basada. That's before everything you plant in the field. Afilu L'chodesh Shel Seorim, even for the new crop of barley. And Minayin Shetei Kodem LeBikurim Shel Chitin Shegadlu Begag. How do we know that it also precedes the Shtei Halechem precede the Bikurim of wheat which grow on a roof, of a chorba or a rune? The min hamuvchar, and the idea would be that which it said in the Mishnah, it has to be from the best when one brings bikurim. Hainu lemitzvah, that would just be a mitzvah lechatchila. It's not absolutely required. Talmud lomar bikurei kol asher bi'artzachem. It says bikurei kol asher bi'artzachem. It means afilu begag, even the roof. Denemar kan bikurei kol asher bi'artzachem. It says here bikurei kol asher bi'artzachem. V'nemar lahalan bikurei ketzir chitim, and it says further on bikurei ketzir chitim. Ma bikurim ha'amar lahalan shtei halechem kodem lakol. Just like by bikurei ketzir chitim, the idea is bikur. The idea is that the shtei halechem precedes everything. Afkan shtei halechem kodem lechol bikurim shabartzachem. So too over here, the idea is that the shtei halechem precedes all bikurim in your land. Minayin shtei kodemes lenesachim upeiros ilan, from where we know that it precedes the libations and the fruits from the tree. Shelo yavi nesachim min hachodesh. The idea is you shouldn't bring libations from the new wine. Ubikurim mipeiros tamorim v'zeisim, and you shouldn't bring the first fruits from the dates and from the olives kodem l'shtei halechem, before the shtei halechem. The nesachim lo mashma le mi bikurei kol asher bi'artzam, because nesachim you wouldn't get from the pasuk of bikurei kol asher bi'artzam. The high krab bikurim ksiv, because this pasuk is by bikurim. Ve'ein mevi'in nesachim bikurim. One doesn't bring libations as bikurim. Ve'aydi de boy nesachim boy peiros ilan. And once we're already asking about nesachim, we ask about peiros ilan. And ma'alahalan, just like over there by the gathering, nesachim upeiros ilan, it's talking about libations and tree and fruit from the trees. Dechsiv ma'asecha kol ma'asecha. It says ma'asecha means everything. Plus, that's the time when they gather the wine and the fruits. So afkan, so to over here, chag hakotzir, afagav dechsiv tizra basada. Over here also, even though it's written tizra basada, nesachim upeiros Parasilim B'mashma, but Nesachim and Parasilim are also included. The Shtei Halechem Kodem Lahem, that the Shtei Halechem comes before them. And then the Gemara finally got to its question, Katani Miyah Shebegag V'Shebechurva Minayin. Nevertheless, what is mentioned over here in this brayse? It talks about on the roof and in the rune, from the fact that it says it sounds like it's saying that Bikurim can be brought from the roof, etc. Certainly from the dates in the mountains, in the valleys, those are even better than the ones in the roof. You can bring Bikurim. That's difficult to Ula above. And then the Gemara answered, Seifa, the Katani Shebegag, V'Shebechurva, the end of that brisa, which mentioned the roof and the rune, Asan Lemenachos, that's referring to Menachos, not Bikurim. Shiushtei Alechem Kodmen Nami Lemenachos Techitim, Shegadlu Begag V'Shebechurva. The Shtei Alechem needs to precede any wheat Menachos that grew on the roof or in the rune. V'Leko Lemeimar D'Mevian Mehen Bikurim. It's not to say that you can bring from their Bikurim, V'Lo Kasha Le'ula, and therefore it's not difficult to Ula. Rashi continues with another explanation, in Yinacher, another way of understanding. Seifa dekra asan lemenachos, not the end of the brisa, but the end of the pasuk refers to menachos. The hai bikurei hainu bikurim. When it says bikurei, it's bikurim v'chol asher ba'artzam hainu menachos. The phrase v'chol asher ba'artzam is menachos. V'gamrina gzer shavet nemar kan bikurim v'nemar lahalan bikurei ketzir chitim. We have a gzer shavet. It says bikurim. It says bikurei ketzir chitim. Ma'alahalan shtei halechem kodem lahem. Just like over there, the shtei halechem is first. Afkan b'haikra dekamayri b'menachos. So too in this pasuk, which is talking about menachos, shtei halechem kodem lahem, the shtei halechem is first. But the Gemara continues and asks, Maskif lo Ravad Barava asks, Ihachi, if so, Hainu dichsiv kol tor beveischa yochal oso. It says in the pasuk, that same pasuk that was quoted above, with regards to that which grows on the roof, it says, kol tor beveischa, everyone pure in your house can eat it. That's the pasuk. It's the same pasuk where it says, Bikure kol asher bi'artzam. And again, that was the pasuk that was quoted by Gag and Churba and Otzitz and Svina. The full pasuk over there is, Bikure kol asher bi'artzam asher yaviu l'Hashem l'chayiyah kol tor beveischa. And if now we're saying that this pasuk in this part of the brisa is referring to menachos, so the Gemara asks, V'i menachos, if we're talking about menachos, lezichrei kahuna hu demesachlan. Menachos are only eaten by zichrei kahuna, male kohanim. It's not eaten by kol tor beveischa. It wouldn't be eaten by the women, and so therefore it doesn't make sense to say that that part of the pasuk is talking about menachos. And Rashi Ksav Yad explains, Hainu Dichsiv, is that what's written by Haikra in this pasuk, to Bikure Kol Asher Bi'artzam Kol Tar. It says in this pasuk of Bikure Kol Asher Bi'artzam, it says Kol Tar. V'afilu Nashim, that would include even women. V'ibe Menachos Mishtoikra, but if the pasuk there is talking about Menachos, like we just said, so Lezichre Kohuna Hu Demisachlu, it's only the male Kohanim that eat that. V'Menachos Ksiv Kol Zochar B'Kohanim Yochlen. It says by Menachos that all the male Kohanim, and so therefore that would not make sense. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar of Mesharshia says, Trei Kroi Ksivi. It says in this pasuk, it's written two different phrases. It says, L'chayeh, it is yours. That implies that it's to the male Kohanim. Uchsiv, and then it's also written, Kaltar beveischa yochal oso. It says, anyone who's pure in your household, in the house of the Kohen, can eat it. That would imply the women as well. And so Hakait said, how do we interpret the pasuk in any case? So the pasuk has different parts. Kan bikurim, here we're talking about bikurim, that's eaten by everyone in the household. And kan menachos, and then the other part of the pasuk is talking about menachos. The Gemara continues with another answer. Ravashi says, Kule b'menachos. You can say the whole pasuk is actually talking about menachos. However, v'seifa dekra, but the end of the pasuk, which says kaltar beveischa yochal oso, which is including women as well, that seifa dekra asan l'lachmei toda. That's talking about lachmei toda. That's the portion of the loaves of the toda, one roll from each set of 10 one loaf from each set of 10 loaves. Again, it was a total of 4 that was given to the Kohen. That matnas kahuna, that gift to the Kohen, is given to his entire household to eat. And the Gemara continues again, Ula said above that if Bikurim is brought from the mountain dates or from the grain from the valley, so that is not going to be Kaddish, it will not be sanctified as Bikurim. And the Gemara now says, Bepluksa, that issue is actually a Machlokas Amoraim as follows. Rabbi Yochanan says, Im Hevi lo Kiddush, if one brings from the mountains or the valleys, it is not sanctified. Reish Lakish says, Im Hevi Kiddush, that if he brings it from those areas, it is sanctified, because Nasa Kekachosh Bekachim, it's like bringing a lean animal by Kachim, by Karbon, Kavanos, even though that is not preferred, but it is still accepted, it still has that Kedusha. And the Gemara continues, Bishlama Reish Lakish, it makes sense what Reish Lakish says. Kedamar Taima, he gives his reason. He says, Nasa Kekachosh Bekodshim. El Rabbi Yochanan, my Taima, but Rabbi Yochanan, what is his reason? The Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Yochanan Chazoi Bechalom. I saw Rabbi Yochanan in a dream, meaning to say, I saw Rabbi Yochanan in a dream last night, and Milsa Al Yasa Amina, and so therefore I know that I'm going to say something that is good, meaning I'll say something that is good right now. Amar Kra, the Pasuk says, Mei Reishis, it says in the Pasuk, from the first, and that implies Velo Kol Reishis, that implies not all of the first, and Mei Artzach, it says from your land, Velo Kol Artzacha, and not all of your land. And the idea over here is that when it says Mei Reishis, Velo Kol Reishis, that means it's only brought from the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael, as we mentioned, and again, Mei Artzacha, Velo Kol Artzacha, that's exactly the idea that Rabbi Yochanan just said above, that if it's brought from the mountains or the valleys, it will not be Kadosh, it won't have that Kedusha, it's only from certain areas of your land. And the Gemara continues and asks Reish Lakish, so according to Reish Lakish, Hi Mei Artzacha, my Avidle, what does he do with Mei Artzacha? And the Gemara continues and answers me, Boy Le L'chidetanya, he needs it for what is taught in the Brisa as follows. The Brisa says, Rabbi Gamliel, Rebbe Omer, Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rebbe, says, Nemar Kan Eretz, it says over here, Eretz, land, V'nemar Lahalon Eretz, and it says further on, Eretz, Ma Lahalon Shavach Eretz, just like over there, we're talking about that which is praised in the land, the praise of the land of Israel, Afkan Shavach Eretz, so to over here, we're talking about the praise of the land of Israel. And Rashi explains, V'reish Lakish and Reish Lakish, Kevon do Amarim Hevi Kiddush, since he says if it's brought from these inferior areas, it is Kadosh, so Hai Mei Artzacha, my Avidle, what does he do with Mei Artzacha? And the Gemara said, Nemar Kan Eretz, it says Eretz over here, meaning Asher Tavi Mei Artzacha, it says Asher Tavi Mei Artzacha by Bikurim, V'nemar Lahalon Eretz Chito So'or, it also says Eretz Chito So'ora, Ma Lahalon Misaber B'shivcha Shel Eretz Yisrael, just like over there, the Pasuk speaks of the praise of Eretz Yisrael, Tahani Peiros Hein Meshubach and Mishar Peiros, because these fruits are the best, they're better than other fruits. Afkan ein mevin bikurim element of mashubach. So over here, bikurim has to be brought from the best. Uliola mevin mitmarim shabaharim, and really we do bring from the dates in the mountains. Uvilvadshu min hamashubach, but the point just is, it has to be from the best. And the Gemara continues, V'idach, and the other opinion, meaning Rabbi Yochanan, what does he respond to this? Eretz Mei Eretz, it says Eretz and it says Mei Eretz, so you can actually learn two things from there. V'idach, and the other opinion, meaning Reish Lakish, Eretz Mei Eretz, Lo Mashmalei. He doesn't learn things from Eretz Mei Eretz, he doesn't learn an additional thing from the fact that there is the Mem. And the Gemara continues, Tani Chada, we learned in one brayso, Shebegag, V'Shebechurba, Shebeotzitz, V'Shebesfina, if the produce comes from the roof or the rune or the pot or the ship, Mevi V'Korei, one can bring Bikurim from those areas and read the Psukim. V'Tanya Yidach, we learned in another brayso, Mevi V'Eino Korei, he can bring, but he cannot read the Psukim. And the Gemara says, Bishlama Reish Lakish. Now I can understand this contradiction in braysos according to Reish Lakish, who says that in general from these kinds of areas, one can bring Bikurim. So Gaga Gag Lo Kasha, the contradiction in terms of roof is not difficult. Ha begag de ma'ara, one case it's the roof of a cave. Ha begag de bayis, in one case the roof of a house. And churba achurba lo kasha, rune against rune, that's also not difficult. Kan bechurba avuda, one case we're talking about where the rune is cultivated. Kan bechurba she'ena avuda, here we're talking where the rune is not cultivated. And otzitz lo kasha, pot and pot, that's not a contradiction. Kan benekuva, in one case there's a hole in the pot. Kan b'she'eno nekuva, in one case there's no hole in the pot. And svina lo kasha, the ship against the ship, that's also not a question. Kan besvina shel eitz, in one case it's made out of wood. Kan besvina shel cheres, in one case it's made out of earthenware. And Rashi explains, Bishlama Reish Lakish, this works according to Reish Lakish, the Amar Kitsha, who says again, brought from these areas is sanctified. Ikal Terutze, we can answer Hadatani Mevi V'Kori, the Brisa which says you bring and you read the Psukim associated with the Bikurim Bechor Ba'avuda, that's when it's cultivated, the rune. And Dekevan de Nevda, since it's cultivated, the Tarach Ba, that he put in that effort, Mei Artzacha Karina Ba, that's called Mei Artzacha from your land. And Besfina Shel Cheretz, if it's an earthenware ship, Mevi V'Kore, he brings and he reads Mishum de Shel Eretzi, because that's from the land, it's of the earth. And Rashi Ksaviyad explains, Gag de Ma'ora, the roof of a cave, Choshev Kakarka, that's like land, Umevi V'Kore, one can bring and read the Psukim. And Begag de Bayis, the roof of a house, Shazora al Hagag, that he plants on the roof, the Bayis of the house, maybe he brings Velo Kore, and he does not read the Psukim. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Amud Aleph.